How many of you, if you'll be honest, have learned something and enjoyed our walk through the book of Hebrews? Nobody. Oh, okay, there were some.
I've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed it.
What?
We're afraid you're going to ask us what we learned.
No. Okay. So we're coming to the end of this letter, and the author is going to wrap up his letter with some quick kind of standalone wisdom sayings. And when you read chapter 13 of Hebrews, it kind of reminds you of the Proverbs, and it kind of reminds you of the letter of James in the New Testament. Short statements that stand alone. Now, I'm not going to focus on, there's two things that I feel I want to focus on, so I'm not going to focus on every last one, although I will read some of those. But I just want to remind you that last week, chapter 12, was about enduring trials and hardships in our lives as God bringing us discipline as His children. And the end of chapter 12, I believe, goes into chapter 13. You remember I said that if I'd been the one dividing it, I would have put at least the first verse in chapter 12, maybe the first 3 verses. But he ended by saying, you're struggling, you have your own struggles, you endure it as hardship, however, keep loving each other. And we talked about how important it is for us to help each other through difficulties, and that actually is going to be a recurring theme. So, Lord Jesus, open our hearts, open our ears to hear, help us to grasp what it is you want to say to us this morning. In Jesus' name, amen. So verse 1 simply says, keep on loving one another. Verse 2 is very interesting. Don't forget to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing this, some have helped angels without knowing it. And I don't know if you remember, but in chapter 1 and 2, he had a discourse where he was, I believe, discouraging angel worship, which was not uncommon among the Jews in the first century in what we call the apocalyptic literature of the time. It's talking about the end of the world, and the worship of angels became, unfortunately, quite popular among Jews in the first century. So I think it's interesting that he makes that statement after the things he said about Jesus is greater than the angels, don't get focused on the angels. And he says, if you show hospitality to strangers, you might actually encounter an angel and not know it. And I thought about it when I was getting ready. I have a great angel story that in my own life, but I don't have time to do it. So I'll be happy to share that story with anybody who wants afterwards, or at another time. But I love hearing stories, and some of you have had angelic moments, where you think you've seen or been touched or encountered an angel. Verse 4, stay away from adultery, basically. That's the meaning of, I think, verses 3 and 4. Basically, just don't commit adultery, which is, it's one of the 10 Commandments. Verse 5, keep your lives free from the love of money and be content with what you have. And this continues a theme that I touched on last week. And this is a theme that is in the New Testament consistently. Don't fall in love. Don't live your life for money and things. Be content with what you have. Now, notice, the writer doesn't say material wealth is bad. In fact, nowhere in the New Testament does it say that. Jesus lived the life of a wandering prophet and a wandering philosopher. It was very common in the Greco-Roman world for even non-Christian philosophers to wander around with nothing but the clothes on their back and preach their message, whatever it was, and people would take care. If that person convinced people that he was legitimate, they would feed him, they would give him a place to live. And that's what Jesus did. So people who say that we should all live in poverty, like Jesus Jesus lived on the goodness of a lot of wealthy people around him. He and his disciples were housed and fed numerous times by people who had money. And he never condemned them for it. In fact, I would bet you, using the Old Testament, he blessed them as he entered and as he left their house. That God would continue to bless them so that they could continue to help him. I mean, that's the way God operates. So he's not telling us, hey, money is bad, stay away from money. He's not saying that at all. And the other New Testament texts that speak to this issue, if you take them all and put them together, here's what I believe the New Testament says. Nothing is wrong with wealth. God is going to bless many of us to have stuff. What he wants is he wants us to not be stuck on stuff and not live for stuff. I used to tell my Chi Alpha students in our discipleship class, the danger of materialism is not having stuff. It's never being happy. It's wanting more stuff. Never being able to satisfy that urge. And we've read, many of us, people who win the lottery and their life goes to disaster because they suddenly have the ability to have everything they want, and guess what happens? They don't find any happiness or peace. And then they have all their relatives and friends wanting it, and they dole it out, and the next thing you know, they're broke. But the scriptures talk about a concept that we should be generous. That's really what the New Testament teaches. Be generous with what God has given you. And guess what he says he'll do if you're generous? He'll be generous to you. So indeed, the New Testament teaches, don't live for money, don't live for wealth, but guess what? If you are generous with what you have, he's going to give you more. It's kind of a Chinese finger puzzle. Don't be stuck on wealth, but I guarantee you, if God sees that you're being, he tells the parable of the master who gives the guy 1 talent, 3 talents, 5 talents, and he goes away for a year. When he comes back, the guy with 5 has 10, and he rewards him and says, he puts him in charge of a bunch more stuff, and you know that the master would have given him monies for his service. And they went there, and then the final guy buried his money because he was afraid he would lose it, and he got, according to the parable, he was thrown into the fire where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So take all the texts, and what God is saying is, I will bless you. And if I see that you're a good manager of your life and your funds, and you're generous to people and less fortunate, I will give you more because I see you're not living for it. That's the New Testament teaching on money. Don't live for it, but thank God for it and manage it well. And then we skip down to, I'm going to skip down to verses 15 and 16. Through Jesus, let us continually offer to God a sacrifice of praise, the fruit of lips that openly profess his name. And I made comment about this, that when we come to church on Sunday mornings, but anytime. Actually, Paul, he touched on this in his prayer he shared with me earlier. When things aren't going well, that's when we need to worship. When things aren't going well, that's when we need to tell God how good he is. The kingdom of darkness is the kingdom of darkness because when things didn't go the way the kingdom of darkness wanted it, they turned on God and they said, you're not good. We don't love you because you're not good. It was all about pointing the finger at God and saying, you're not good. You don't love. You're not all the things that, these other angels say you are. So when we, in our difficulty, in the midst of difficulty, we offer sacrifice of praise, I believe that God goes to the kingdom of darkness. God goes, you see this? Do you see this? He or she is suffering. Do you hear this? And we become a witness for God against the rulers of darkness. Has everybody got that? I think that's powerful. But I remember when I was a young man, I dropped out of school when I was 17 without telling my parents. Don't do that to your parents. And went on the mission field, lived in Argentina for almost a year. That's where I lived in a monastery for a little bit. I was on a team, and we were told we were going to do this revival in a town out in the middle of nowhere. And everybody shows up. It's a church about this size, and they crammed 300 people in there. It was packed. And the first night, they asked, you know what? I'm going off on tangents. I'm sorry I'm doing that. This represents one of the first times. No, not one of the first times. My first time to ever serve under a woman leader. Some people say that, women shouldn't be in leadership, and there are texts that seem to say that. This woman was so awesome. Rather than her preaching, she asked some of the young men to speak. She was a great leader, actually. I loved her. She's gone to be with the Lord now, but Sue Seacrest. But anyway, she asked one of our flaming evangelist guys to speak the first night, and he did. And he was waving his arms and dancing around, and it was all excitable, and the interpreter's right with him. Our interpreter was from Puerto Rico, and he was a good interpreter because he would mimic the speaker, so it was actually two guys preaching the same sermon. And, it went well the first night, and everybody was excited, and Sue comes to me that night and says, I shouldn't do this, but I'm going to say it. Alan? No one called me Al at this point. I want you to speak tomorrow night. And I'm thinking, why didn't you ask me to speak before that guy? I'd rather go first. Now I'm following the guy who was waving and all crazy, I had preached, I don't think I'd ever preached in a church. I'd given my testimony and stuff, but I'd never preached. So I was nervous as a cat. And this was my text, the sacrifices that God honors. And I used a couple examples, and I ended on the sacrifice of praise. Now, you guys won't be surprised. I was so nervous. I stood behind the pulpit, and I was very calm, and I never made hand gestures, but the guy from Puerto Rico made my message better, I think, because I would make a statement very calmly, and God help me, I was holding the pulpit because I was nervous. And I would say what I wanted to say, and then he would do arm gestures and stuff, and I'd think, oh, okay. And I would just calmly say it, and then he would do this. And when it was done, and I gave basically the message I just told you of sacrifice of praise. And when it was done, I don't even remember who did the altar call, because I was done. I wanted to go sit down. And they did an altar call, and the place went nuts. The night before, maybe, 6 or 8 people came to the altar, and there was some great prayer, right? And I went, that's exactly what it was now, I remember. As soon as I was done, I just went and sat down. I didn't close, I just went and sat down, and I was feeling, I don't know what to say, embarrassed, I don't know. I was kind of embarrassed probably. And I was just sitting down, I was thinking, oh God, help me. And I think Sue got up and did an altar call, and then I hear all this commotion. I look up, and there's weeping and wailing at the altars, and the guy from Puerto Rico's calling me, and I have to wade through all these sea of bodies, and there's a man, he's just crying his eyes out, and Louis from Puerto Rico goes, Al, this guy wants you to pray for him. And I said, okay, what is it? He goes, he's been living in adultery for like 3 years. He's living with his girlfriend, and he said he's just scared that he needs God and all that, and he wants you to pray for him, and that he'll be forgiven, that he'll go back to his wife. And I'm like, dude, why don't you pray for him? I'm 17 years old. I know nothing about marriage. I know nothing. And that's what happened the whole night. It was crazy, and I was asked to pray for people to be healed, and people got healed. It was bizarre, Abby. It was one of my first times of ever doing anything like that. Well, it was exciting, but I was scared to death. But anyway, I never noticed. I've told you guys several times that me studying through Hebrews, I've seen things I never have seen before, and this is one of them. I never noticed the next verse. After he says, offer the sacrifice of praise, the next verse is, and do not forget to do good and to share with others. For such sacrifices of God, with such sacrifices, God is pleased. And so what it dawned on me, was that one of the major thrusts of this ending chapter is being generous, sharing. And so after the sacrifice of praise, he says, and don't forget to do good and to share with others. And I just thought, wow, that's so awesome. And that I've already said in my next several notes that God will be generous to you when you're generous. You know, anybody heard that book, All I Really Needed to Know I Learned in Kindergarten? That's an old book by now, but it reminded me of that, and so I looked it up online. Any of you guys heard of that? Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm not meaning to belittle you. I hope you know that. I just think it's funny, you know, because I'm old and I think of things that happen, you know. Anyway, sorry.
We're just millions, yeah.
So I looked it up, and there's like a list of 20 things that you supposedly learned in kindergarten that are good and that you should live by. You know what number 1 is? Share everything. Isn't that what we teach children? Share. And it goes with this whole feeling I have in chapter 13. Number 2, play fair. Don't cheat. Play fair. Number 3, don't hit people. That's a good rule. Don't hit people. Even though... I'm not going to say it. Okay. Number 4. Put things back where you found them.
Amen.
You know?
Amen.
I might get Heather to watch this video. Number 5, clean up your own mess.
Amen.
Are you trying to get her to move down here or not?
I'm just playing. She won't listen to she doesn't want to hear me.
She's heard it already.
Say you're sorry when you hurt somebody. But I just think it's interesting. Number 1, share everything. And that's what I believe that one of the main thrusts of this ending of this letter is encouraging us to share, to be generous, and to help each other. And I'm going to come back to that at the end. Now, my second thing that I believe this text, because there's 2 separate places that talk about pastoral leadership, and I want to make some comments on it. It's not something I normally talk about, but how many of you have heard me say that that's why I like teaching through books, because you teach what the Bible teaches with the same emphasis that the Bible teaches. You know, I was telling Larry, one of the reasons I like doing through books of the Bible is I've been under pastors that had little soapboxes, and you know, it didn't matter what they were preaching on, they got on that little soapbox over and over again. If they charted, you know, you always gravitate to your soapbox. And the text, when we do it this way, helps me pastorally to teach the biblical text to the same degree that it is written. So you don't talk against things more than the Bible does, right? Or talk for things more than the Bible does. So I have to deal with leadership, you know, which is not something I normally do. But anyway, verse 7, remember your leaders who spoke the word of God to you. Consider the outcome of their way of life and imitate their faith. Now I'll just tell you guys something. I really have hesitation saying that to anybody. Now when I was in my latter 20s and early 30s, I told everybody to be like me. You know, there's a joke as you get, this is a good message for you guys. There's a joke among people who are past 40 that when they meet someone in their later 20s or early 30s, they know it all. They know everything. When we know they know everything, because we knew everything when we were that age. And then you get a little older and you realize, there's a lot of stuff that I don't really know, or there's a lot of gray areas, you know. But remember the context of this verse. This writer is writing to Jewish Christians who are being persecuted and are wanting to go back to Judaism. And some of them have been arrested, some of them have been beaten, some of them have been imprisoned, and some of them have had their property confiscated. You know, remember the text says share, be generous to one another. And that's because they're in a context where some people in the congregation have had everything taken from them by the Romans, probably. for causing civil disturbance. That's one of the things the Romans would do. You know, oh, you're going to cause riots? How about we come and take your house and everything you own? And now you're homeless. Now you have nothing. It's a good way to stop riots, I'm telling you. And so the example that this writer is saying is, look at the men who are leading this congregation. They have suffered for their faith. Imitate that. Stick to your guns and don't go back to the law of Moses. That's the context here. But look at verse 9. So remember your leaders, consider the outcome of their faith. Verse 9, do not be carried away by all kinds of strange teachings. And that is another big point, I believe, in church leadership. I remember I was meeting with another pastor, and he was asking me about how we do things. And I told him the context of what we're doing here. And he didn't like it. And he said, well, I'm not comfortable with you leaving the church 2 Sundays in a row. And you know, it doesn't sound like you're guarding the pulpit to me. It doesn't sound like you're... Who's guarding the sheep against false teaching? And I said... Because that is part of what the writer is saying. You know, the leadership is in place so that strange doctrine doesn't take hold in the body of Christ. But I said to this guy, I said, I'm the only one who's protecting that church against false teaching? That would be sad. I said, I guarantee you, if I'm in Texas and somebody gets up and says something weird, I have people in that church who are not going to stand there and let that happen. Something will happen. Trust me, there are people who I trust. I'm not the only one Not only that, who protects the church against me? I've been in churches where I heard from the pulpit things that I sat there and thought, that's just wacky. I was in a church where the preacher said, God help me. The preacher said, when you come to church here, you check your brain at the door. Check your brain at the door when you come to church here. And he went on to say, don't question what we do here. And I looked around and thought, I knew this guy. And he knew I was there. And I waited for 10 or 12 minutes after he said that and waited for a little break in the action, and I slipped out of the church and I never went back there. So I'm going to encourage you, don't check your brain at the door anywhere. God gave you a brain to think with, and God actually uses logic, by the way. You know, I have another friend who was online with some millennials. I hate to pick on millennials all the time. And he was debating them in a social media context. And he said, no, I'm going to do this. I'm going to keep going. And he challenged these millennials with a comment, and they attacked it. And he goes, look, I'm just using logic. And they went off and saying things like, blankety blank logic. Logic's no good. Trust me, you guys, God uses logic. He created us to use logic. It's a reflection, logic is a reflection of God's brain. So don't check your brain at the door. Love God with all your heart, all your mind, all your soul, or is it heart, soul, mind, and strength? Oh, Lord, help me, God. Stick to my notes, right? Verse 17, have confidence in your leaders and submit to their authority because they keep watch over you as those who must give an account. When I left pastoral ministry to go and do my academic work, I had a couple pastors tell me, are you leaving pastoral ministry? And I said, well, no, I'm hoping to pastor while I'm in Scotland. And they said, well, let me just tell you, if you ever leave pastoral ministry, you'll never come back. And I said, why do you say that? And he said, you just won't. And after I got back from doing my PhD work, I did indeed go without doing any pastoral ministry for 15 years. But when we were in that context, I told my wife one day, I said, man, it's amazing not being pastors anymore, there's like a big weight that's not on my back that I never fully realized was on my back. There's a danger in pastoral ministry of taking on things that you don't need to take on. And I'm going to speak to that because, I have a tendency to do that. And I am blessed to have people in this church who are willing to come and tell me things. And I want to encourage you in something. When I taught discipleship at Alabama, we always did a discipleship class, and it was for anyone who wanted to, actually anybody who wanted to follow the way of discipleship, but it was also, you had to take this class to be a leader in our ministry. My last year there, Richard Skinner was in the discipleship class, and I knew him. I knew his name. I knew who he was. I met him. I didn't know all the new students. I think there were like 40 people in the discipleship class my last year there, and we usually had 30 to 40. So I couldn't know all the new students till they got to be a little older in leadership. But I would tell the discipleship class, we would cover church authority and the whole concept of authority, and I would tell them, look, you need to respect leadership over you, but you don't give respect to people. People earn respect. You can respect an office, but I think we as believers need to understand that respect is earned. You can give respect to an office, but you truly respect people who earn the right to be respected. We live in an age now where leaders think because they have a title or they have letters behind their name that they deserve respect. That's just not life. Anybody will tell you who works in a job as a professional, just because someone has a title doesn't mean you have to look, people do stupid things.
I hate to interrupt, Val, but I like what you're saying, because I noticed that a lot too when I work on my own job. I work that and feel like, okay, I have a degree, so I'm not going to respect you, but you better respect me. And I'm thinking in my head, well, just because you have a degree, that doesn't mean
That's right.
people that have respect, because you have to respect people or to get that back.
So as a pastor, I would tell my students, and I believe this, that I can be your pastor, but you can call me pastor, but I believe if I'm your friend, I can be a more effective pastor in your life. Because if I'm your friend, then I can say things to you that I know you don't want to hear, and you're willing to listen to me because I'm your friend. And you know I care about you. And I'm not just on a title. Hey, I'm the pastor, so you have to do what I say. Good grief. You can leave a church now. It's not like when we had a Catholic church and there was only one church in town. You can't make people follow you. And you have to earn the right, I believe, to be a leader. As a young man, I was thrust into leadership because I was an athlete. I was willing to speak openly about my faith. I have a vibrant personality, and I was thrust into leadership. None of the things that I just mentioned none of those things qualified me to be a leader. And I wasn't ready to be a leader when I was thrust into leadership. You have to earn a certain place. And what I want you guys to know is, in Ephesians 5, Paul gives some general exhortations like this writer in Hebrews, and he makes the statement, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Now the next verse is where we like to start the text. Wives, be submitted to your husbands. We like that verse. And we leave off the one right before it. Paul has just written some things that are very clear. He's talking to all of us before he goes to husbands and wives, and he says, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. And what I want to say about leadership in the church is this. Yes, God called me to be the kind of the leader, the pastoral leader of this church. But I have to submit to you too. It's not a one-way street. I cannot demand submission from anybody. I need to earn that right. But I believe part of my role as a believer is I submit to you. I submit to the church. I can't just do whatever I want all the time. And I thank God that I have people here that I know, I have confidence in, will tell me what I need to hear. They have done that. Now I'm a little hard-headed sometimes, and I don't listen the first time. And God is good to me, because usually when one person tells me something, like later that day or the next day, someone else comes to me and tells me the same thing. Now, I would like to tell you that I always respond on the second go. It usually takes three, and when I hear the third one, it's kind of like the smartest mule. The farmer had the smartest mule in the world. He was showing it off, and and the other farmer said, "Oh, this is the smartest mule in the world? Well, show me why he's so smart." And the other farmer picked up a 2x4 and cracked him upside the head. He told him he'll plow the field if I tell him to, and he takes a 2x4 and whacks him. And the other farmer goes, "What are you doing? I thought he was the smartest mule in the world." And he goes, "Well, he is, but you got to get his attention first."
Yeah.
Well, that tends to be the way I am with God. So what's happened on a couple of occasions is 2 or 3 people in this church come and tell me the same message, and then it's like, okay, I gotta listen. And that's the way it needs to be in the body of Christ. I thank God that's also, by the way, servant leadership. I thank God that we have a really solid little church beginning to form here. I came here with a vision that we would have a church that it would be a congregationally led church. That everything's not going to flow from me. That we're going to be a team. And I'm seeing that happening. I see people stepping up all around me, doing things, And this is how you become a leader. You don't wait for someone to tell you or ask you to do something. If you see a need, you do it. That's what leaders do. And leaders they kind of reveal themselves by doing stuff. And we call that servant leadership. But servant leadership is not just doing the things you like to do. Oh, I like doing this, so I'll do it. Or I want to do this, so yeah, I'll serve the church by doing the things I like to do. No, servant leadership is doing what you see needs to be done when no one else seems to be doing it. And you may not like doing it. That's when you're serving. Because when you're doing things because they need to be done. And I thank God because I see that happening. I'm so sorry. Oh, wonderful. The vision God gave me when I initially came here comes from my days of playing team sports. I loved, and I still do, I love team sports. I like, some of the teams, my favorite teams to play on were, I think of a couple basketball teams I played on where none of us were superstars, but we played as a team. We didn't have selfishness among us. And we would beat teams with much better athletes. Because typically much better athletes they get selfish. They want to score they think about how many points have I scored tonight. My gosh, I was usually one of the leading scorers on every basketball team I ever played on. I didn't know what my average was. I didn't care. All I wanted was to win, and I had teammates like that, and those are my favorite teams, where guys who just want to play as a team and win. And that's what we have developing here as a church. I love what I'm seeing. We're building a congregation with a team approach, and I love being on this team. So that's kind of in a nutshell my message on leadership. We need authority in our lives, all of us. I mean, we have people we have to answer to. But in a local church setting, if we live and serve as a team and we keep our ego in check, God will do great things among us. And I see Him doing it now. And I'm thankful for that. I mean, I love these girls getting up and singing with me. I love Larry coming and cutting the grass for us. I mean, I didn't ask him to. He asked me. What? God bless him for that. And God will bless him for that. Now Larry's going to tell you, well, God's already blessed me. But God's going to bless him more for that. Jeff and Abby were here last night working on stuff. God's going to bless them for that. We're in a context now where, and I've been very blessed in the last couple of weeks, watching us as a congregation rally around each other in time of need. I'm done. Comments? Questions? Anybody want to? What do you think? What's God saying to you? What's happening in your mind and in your heart? I know it's been a kind of a spastic. It's been a little spastic, my message. I had a time-consuming week. Okay. Nobody? Comments? Questions? No? Well, we're
I'm just
done.
happy everybody's working together, helping each other, loving each other, praying together as one family. This feels good.
We all work for the same God.
I want to tell something funny. I was on the phone with Al, and he was at Tony and Lori's by himself, and he said, "This little thing is running across the floor, vacuuming the floor. It's coming down the hall. It is coming down the hall where I am." It was so funny. It was so funny to hear him talk about it.
I thought I was by myself, and I was going to the bathroom.
Just overreaction now. That's all.
Yeah.
I heard this loud noise, and I thought, I didn't think anybody was here. Maybe Bryant's back. And I go out, and the thing almost hit me. Little robot vacuuming system. It was good. Well, let's stand and...
Wait, what? Tony said
On
something.
that note, he was very inquisitive about we were in Laverne Monday,
Oh, yeah.
and if you're going through from Laverne to Fort Rutledge, right there where you turn to go to the high school, there's a small plot of grass, and there was a robotic lawnmower. I wanted to see who made it. I did, and as we started to go, Al went, "Stop! What? Just stop!" So I stopped. He got this thing has been pictured all the way. Al gets out, and he's right behind him. He doesn't. Seeing who made it wasn't quite. He was out there looking at it, studying it all day. So, yeah.
I'd never seen one. I thought it was cool.
Yeah.
Really?
Where is
It
it?
is.
Troy?
It's on Spradley, on the corner of
It's gone.
Spradley.
It's
And,
gone.
Because that's where we live down that
oh,
way.
really? It's gone?
Here's what I don't get. What keeps that from being stolen? That's...
Well, it's gone.
It doesn't.
Well, if
Maybe
you
it did
steal it,
stop
right.
it being stolen because it's been there a long time.
It's programmed only to the base.
Uh-huh.
And
So the
if you
base-
take it, it won't work.
Yeah, it won't
But the
work.
base, you said the base is still
But
there.
the base is still there.
But it's gone.
And
the
there's a
grass is
whole long
alive.
story about how it got there and all of that. But I haven't seen it because we see it every day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And everybody talks
I
about
kind
it.
of miss it.
I
We
haven't been down that way.
watch it at night because it's got headlights and and it does its thing. And
Wait. It has lights.
yeah,
Yeah.
Just so everybody can see it?
no,
No.
so we can see where it's going.
Why would it need to see where it's going? Now, listen. How would it doesn't need to see where it's going.
No, I thought it would be GPS.
Yeah.
It is, but it has lights on it, so it looks like it. See,
So just run over somebody, you know?
Do it.
there's a wire buried around the perimeter of the property.
So
And
no,
it
not
feeds off of
so.
that. But it has rhythms that you would think, like when you see patterns and they say, well, how can it know where to go when it goes? It actually has a smart pattern. It memorizes it and it gets that thing going. And it's sad that it's now gone.
Yeah.
'Cause
So does
I hope
it-
I hope
Does
it
it
just
quick breaks all
gets
the time
tired
and
and
then go back
it needs
to-
an update.
It's programmed.
Somebody can take it.
All right. Go ahead.
When you were going through Hebrews 13. Okay. So in verse 5, I have the Amplified. I think that's what it is. Anyway, it's called the Amp version. It says in here, for he, God himself said, I will not in any way fail you, nor give you up, nor leave you without support. And it goes on to say some more stuff, but I saw that, and that's encouraging, that he will never fail us or leave us without support. So, that's a promise of his. And sometimes we forget those promises.
Yeah, and I think in this context, the writer is saying that we become part of that support for each other. So, absolutely. Let's stand and we'll be dismissed. Miranda,
Yes.
can you close in prayer?
Sure.
Perfect.
Lord, I thank you so much for just bringing us all here together to worship together and to hear your message today, Lord. I thank you for each and every person in this room who sacrifices something for this church, Lord, who steps up and becomes a leader and helps to guide this church in the right direction, Lord. I thank you for all the blessings that you pour down upon us, and for today during worship when we felt just the wings of angels coming down and surrounding us, Lord. I thank you for that. I thank you that we love each other so much that this is a place that we can come and feel comfortable, Lord, a place that we can be ourselves and serve you to the highest extent, Lord. Lord, I ask that you would just help guide us, Lord. Help us become the best us that we could be, Lord. I ask that you would surround this church with protection, and that when we give things up to you, Lord, that when we surrender ourselves to you, Lord, that you would use us in ways that we couldn't even imagine, Lord, that something only you can do in our lives, Lord. I thank you, and I ask that you would just help us throughout this week to focus on you and to hone our eyes on you, and to follow your guidance, Lord. And in your name I pray. Amen.
Amen.
That is not funny.